of ancient Kemet. So I hope that you are doing well. I hope all this is going well with you. And I want to talk a little bit about these wonderful people here today, and to kind of drive home some of the aspects of the 17th dynasty, because a lot of times when we talk about ancient Kemet, we talk about things in terms of the dynastic rulers and the rulers who ruled over both parts of the two lands, if you will, at a time, at particular point in times. We talk about big buildings, and we don't talk about the things that led to those things. And a lot of times there are huge parts and important parts of their history that we just leave out, right? And we have a way of doing that. I think, in our society and in a Western dominated society, we tend to talk about war. We like war and big things and, big building blocks and things of that nature. And we don't talk about a lot of times the things that make those things happen, right? And it's not just important whether or not somebody built a big building or whether or not somebody, killed a lot of people in the war. A lot of times the aspects and the things that lead up to the wonderful things that we talk about and we think about are very important and significant. So I want to bring to you and talk about not just the big parts of Kemetic history and Kushite history, but talk about the things that are kind of left out, the things we need to talk about more. So I want to talk about Dynasty 17 today. I want to talk about this wonderful dynasty and about these people and kind of what we're doing. So we're going to kind of jump into it. And I thank all of those who are supporting and those who continue to kind of, purchase books on Amazon. I very much appreciate it. I thank you for looking at Religion of the Black Land and going on to Amazon and checking out my books on my website, blackindeducation.org. I have a lot of resources, some artwork that's available there, some black art that's there. If you'd like to take a look at it, it's all at blackindeducation.org. So I appreciate your support and helping with that. So let's get in and talk about the 17th dynasty. Let's talk about Dynasty 17, because as we talk about Dynasty 17, we're going to be talking about this time period here. You see kind of, 1550 to 1525, and it isn't just the 1550 to 1525. You kind of have to back up like 100 years, right? You kind of back up 100 years to a little more than 100 years and go to about 1640 BC. And this is a time period in ancient Kemet where things are kind of in a bit of a disarray. Historians like to talk about it as being a time period where, you have, disorganization is taking place there, and people are in a situation where they're not sure like who's the leader. And you kind of take a look at this part over here. I'll kind of make it a little bigger for you so you can just get an idea of what we're talking about as we kind of look at Dynasty 17. We're talking about a situation where the upper part of Kemet is not in cahoots and in kind of coordination with you and cooperation with the lower part of Kemet. It is a time when the Hyksos are in charge, and the Hyksos, the Kawets, the foreign rulers, if you will, they were people who came into ancient Kemet, and they're people who had a bit of a challenge with determining whether or not they were invaders in one massive swoop, or did they come in over a period of time, or was it some combination of both? But the story of the 17th dynasty is a story of how ancient Kemet basically gives rise to the new kingdom. Without the 17th dynasty, there is no 18th dynasty as we know it. There is no 18th dynasty. There is no new kingdom. There's no Tutankhamen. There's no Ramses II. There's no Amenhotep III. There's no Tutmos III. There's no Hatshepsut. None of that has taken place. The temple at Karnak was already being built by this time, but expands greatly under the 18th dynasty and the New Kingdom. So there are a lot of things. There's an explosion of art and literature and really empire, if you will, in terms of spreading its borders beyond just the traditional boundaries of ancient Kemet. That happens because of what they do in the 17th dynasty. It happens because of what women and men, like this woman right here, who's probably a queen either in the 17th or the 18th dynasty. She was a queen. Is what happened with the people, her family, really. What did they do and how did they work this out? So as we go back and we look at Dynasty 17, it's obviously preceding Dynasty 18. And we're looking right here around Waset. So if you take a look at Waset there, we kind of see the word Dynasty 17 there in a little kind of red square, if you will, right there around Waset, which today we call Thebes, right? Right there is where the center of this family was. So this family that is the 17th dynasty that would become the 18th dynasty, they are centered right there in Waset, and they are worshiping Amen. They are moving forward with traditional ways in which Kemetic people worshipped. They're kind of in the footsteps, in the shadow, if you will, of the Middle Kingdom. So you think about the 11th dynasty, Amenhotep II. You think about the people in the 12th dynasty. They're kind of in the shadows of them, and they continue to move forward traditional things with respect to ancient Kemet that have been around for thousands of years. And as we know, many people in the southern part of Kemet, originally that was where the culture that would become Kemet came from. It came from the southern part of Kemet, around Nekhen and places like that. It came from the southern part of Kemet. So you find that the people in this area of Waset in Dynasty 17, around 1640 BC, are continuing to practice their ways. They're continuing to practice what they believe to be their religion and their traditional ways. And the people that we call the Hyksos, they were called the Hyksos by Manetho, who was a priest later on, much later on in the Greco-Roman times, and he was asked to write a history of ancient Kemet, and he did so in Greek, and he called them the Hyksos, but they were really called foreign rulers. And the word is a little bit of a different word. It was more of this Hikal Kaswet here. More of that word right there was what was used from a Kemetic standpoint to talk about who the Hyksos were. And the Hyksos were there, and they were foreigners, so they were not native to the land. How did they get there? Who were they? And I believe there's a connection with them. There's a lot of strong comments around whether or not they were connected to what will become the Hebrews, what will become the Jewish people, and whether or not their sojourn in ancient Kemet and the manner in which they were kicked out, was that somehow, from a legend standpoint, connected with the Exodus story that people would come up with and later on present in the Bible and from a Jewish perspective. So there's a lot of conversation around it. Manetho talks about that. There's a lot of conversation in history around the connection between the Hyksos and the Hebrew people. And we can talk more about that. We can kind of jump into that. I think there's a connection. I think there's too much of a coincidence for there not to be a connection. Did it happen exactly the way people say it? I don't think so. I don't think the evidence shows that. But I do think that there is some connection with people who were from outside of ancient Kemet and who got unceremoniously kicked out. And it wasn't exactly the way people talked about it, but I think there was possibly something. We may be talking about people who some kind of way had some connection with that. But let's talk about what the record shows and what we can see from a Kemetic standpoint. So the Hyksos people are there. They're around 1640 BC. There's a good chance that they came in like a lot of people come in. Think about, places that are in demand today. Think about places around the world that are stable, that have a relative, good food supply, good economy, and people coming to it at times when there's disruption going on in other parts of the world. You're going to have people who come in. They come in for various reasons, because they're hungry, because they want a stable environment, because maybe they're leaving some chaos in the part of the world where they were. So you're talking about a time, 1640 BC. Not only was there some disruption in ancient Kemet, there was disruption in various places all around the world, various places throughout the world at this point in time, and all points in time, really, there's fighting going on, and there's disruption, and people are trying to fight for land, and they're trying to fight for influence. And up until this time, for the most part, in general, Kemetic people pretty much stayed. They pretty much stayed in their area. So you think from the first cataract with being the southern border of ancient Kemet, going all the way up to the north, going into the Sinai Peninsula, and a little beyond that, that was pretty much where they stayed. They went some into Lower Nubia. After this, they go very much into Upper Nubia, which we'll talk about. But they had some soirees, if you will, into Lower Nubia or down to the second cataract. But they were, for the most part, their traditional boundaries were between like the Sinai and the Delta, up in the north and the east, and in the first cataract in the south. But when the Hyksos came, and it is believed that they probably came in a combination of ways. A lot of the Kemetic text talks about the Hyksos as being invaders, that they came in an invasion type of way. Some people believe that they might have been coming over a period of time, and they settled in the Delta. So you find a lot of the Hyksos people in the Delta, and you find them coalescing around a city called Avaris, which is in the northern part, in the delta right there around the Nile, at the very near the Mediterranean Sea. And they probably came in a number of ways. However they came in, if they were coming in as immigrants, they were coming in settling over a period of time and building up a massive amount of people and support amongst themselves and kind of coalescing, they eventually took power. They eventually were able to take over in the north and to basically control things. They set up a king. They had people pay tribute to them. They were trying to subject the people in Upper Kemet in the southern part to tributes and to payment and that type of thing. So they set up a kingdom, and they were in charge. They had power for over 100 years. They had power for at least 100 years, over 100 years. And so you find them, and it's very interesting when you look at them. And I know there are a lot of people in the comments who know a lot about this. And I'll ask you to share now or share later. God bless you. Same people as or Hyksos. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ms. Teamsy. How are you doing? God bless you. And Amar Berry, thank you so much. A lot of your comments. I appreciate that. Teamsy Amar, thank you so much. God bless you. Marbury, how you doing? Hope you're doing well. God bless you. They worship the mother. Okay. So as you looked at it, you find that the Hyksos is very interesting. And I know a lot of people in the comments have some comment about this. As I was reading a lot about them, it appears that the Hyksos people, as they set up their their shop, if you will, and their control in the northern part of ancient Kemet, in the delta, if you will, they begin to obviously adopt Kemetic ways. They adopt Kemetic ways, and one of the Kemetic deities that they seem to worship the most, and they seem to kind of amalgamate with their own beliefs, was the deity Set. So you have Set, and you find it kind of prominent in some of their temples and some of their writings and some of the things they left behind to represent them. You find them referencing Set quite a bit. And if you remember Set and what we talked about in terms of Set, you think about a Set versus Haru, the whole Asarian tale and the whole tale of Set trying to usurp the throne and take over the throne, and Haru being the rightful, person to the throne, and this fight taking place between Haru and Set. I find that very interesting. If you stop and think for a minute, just think about that. And I was reading a document today, an old document from the Journal of Egyptian Archaeology. I was reading that today, and they were talking about how it's kind of coincidental that you would find a people who would be, attracted to and kind of, taking on to Set, fighting for control of all of Kemet. And then you find the people who were in the Dynasty 17 in the southern part of Kemet, holding on to our men and considering themselves to be really the rightful rulers of Kemet, keeping up their traditions against the foreign rulers. It's interesting because this ideal of Set versus Haru, it's a funny thing. It comes up over and over again in history, and it comes up over and over again in tales and in funny, even the Lion King. I look at the Lion King, and I see, the dad and the uncle, the evil uncle. You see all these things that come out with respect to it, but to have this happen in a very real sort of way must have meant something to the people of ancient Kemet. So you literally have foreign rulers, Hyksos, in the northern part of Kemet for over 100 years, and they are attaching on to the deity of Set. And Set, would be a deity that even, in the 19th dynasty and the 20th dynasty, they would worship, King Seti and under Ramses II, and those, they would worship Set and give Set prominence as well. So that's an interesting dynamic taking place. But you find the Hyksos attaching themselves and latching on to Set and saying a lot about Set and putting Set forward in a lot of their prayers and their worship and how they put forth themselves on their documents and that type of thing. And the people in the 17th dynasty were there at home in Waset, not having it, really not attaching themselves at all, because at the end of the day, in the temple of Beatrice, you find that obviously Amen and Amun-Ra and the idea of Haru was way more important to them. They were not, having or going to bow down to anybody coming to them from a Setian perspective. They were not going to bow down to it. So there are several pieces of documents that come forward that tell us about what took place during this time and how the 17th dynasty basically gave rise to the 18th dynasty, gave rise to the new kingdom. So you find there's one particular scribe. There's a scribe who in the 19th dynasty was writing down, he was a school student, probably a student, and he was writing down, copying a tale or information with respect to this whole story about the Hyksos and the 17th dynasty. It tells a tale of Pepi, and it's interesting that one of the Hyksos kings, if you will, would kind of be called kind of a Pep, if you will, or kind of a takeoff of that. But one of the kings, Apophis or Pepi, one of the Hyksos kings, apparently in this tale that was being told in the 19th dynasty, was deciding to try to trick the kings of the 17th dynasty, and he wanted to try to do something to make the king of the 17th dynasty seem like he did something wrong, seem like he did something bad, so that he can kind of start a war with him. This is the tale that's being told later on, years after this takes place, and in the story as it goes, it talks about him basically coming and going to Tau the first and Tau the second, and basically saying to him, you know what, you have a pool that's there in Waset, and the pool is so loud. There are hippopotami in the pool, and they're so loud. The animals are so loud. I can hear them all the way in my area, way up in Avarice. I can hear them all the way, and they are keeping me awake. This is the story that was told, and I demand and command that you get rid of this pool, this open pool that's in Waset, and get rid of the animals because it's disturbed me. So this was a tale that was told years later. After this event took place, it was a tale that was told years later, and it's including some of the kings of the 17th dynasty. So you have King Tau the first and King Tau the second, and they're really the ones that start this fight. They're really the ones who start to kind of apparently put up a fight against the Hyksos. They're the ones who kind of go in and start to say, you know what, we're not having this. We're going to move forward. We're not going to have this, and we're going to start to fight back. And you start to see them kind of coalesce. And it wasn't just a fight that took place between two men or two warring armies. People were involved in this fight. This was not just, one versus the other. These were significant, people who had to rally behind the people of the 17th dynasty to fight off the Hyksos, who had emerged as this powerhouse in the northern part of the area. So this scribe who's writing about this in the 19th dynasty basically tells a story that's kind of allegorical and, probably fictional. Obviously, they're not hearing hippos, from Thebes all the way in the Delta, but it's speaking to the fact that people understood that there was animosity between the people in the 17th dynasty, the people who were in Waset and who were in control, and they had control apparently of this whole area. They had control of this whole area in a tightly kind of knit way. And as time progressed, as Tao went on and as Kamose came on the scene after him, they began to solidify their control. So that one document that talks about this in the 19th dynasty, that talks about animosity and its tale between the king of the Hyksos and one of the rulers of the 17th dynasty, is one document that takes place. And so you start to see the names of the people emerge, and you start to see that there's a Tao the first and a Tao the second and Tao the second. And you start to see that they begin to unite themselves as a family. You start to see them kind of move forward. And then after this period of time, another person emerges. And this man, I think, is a brother we should remember, and it's Kamose. Kamose emerges, and he's around 1552 BC, and it's interesting because he's coming on the scene right before his brother, right? He is probably the older brother of Ahmose, the person that we all consider, and this is a picture of Ahmose right here, just so you can see this is a picture of Ahmose right here. He is the younger brother of Kamose, so he is the younger brother, and it's very interesting when you look at this and you take a look at this picture of this queen from the 17th or 18th dynasty. You can the resemblance is striking. You can see the resemblance is striking. So this would maybe be either his mom or maybe his wife, somebody who is a queen very closely related to him, very closely connected with Dynasty 17 or Dynasty 18. So you can see that the resemblance is striking here. So Kamose, his older brother, begins to come on the scene, and he begins to say, you know what, we're not having this. We're not going to be in a situation where we're going to be kowtowing to these people up north. I'm tired of this. These people are, basically serving Set. These people are basically encroaching on our abilities. They are basically taking this whole area that is, in between Upper Kemet and this kind of middle part, this whole area, and they're making the people not rest. They are basically putting taxation or taxing them in a way where they're treating them badly, and they're allowing the soldiers that they have to mistreat the people. We're not going to stand for it. And there's another document, which is a writing board that kind of documented these things. And it was written and probably created about 50 years or very shortly after these events took place. And it describes Kamose's, basically his testimony, his bringing forth of how he did and what he did to fight against the Hyksos. And so God bless you. Thank you so much. I appreciate your comments. So LA Tom, thank you. I thank you so much. Appreciate your comments. The writing board begins to talk about this whole thing. And Kamose, right? So Kamose, who was there around 1552 BC, he decides, I'm taking it to them. I'm going to go ahead and not allow them to take control and continue to do what they're doing in this area right here and basically disrupt Kemet. And he asks his advisors, if you will, what do you think we should do? And sometimes the advisors are kind of like, well, maybe we should wait a minute, or maybe we should take a different approach, and maybe we should kind of, think this through. And he's like, I don't agree with that. Whatever. I'm not having that. I'm not going to agree with it. I'm going to go directly against them. I'm going to fight directly against these people. And you find Kamose goes and he leads his army, and it's very interesting. This is Dynasty 17. This is not Dynasty 18. This is not the new kingdom, quote unquote, officially, as we call it, right? This is Dynasty 17. He leads his army as he kind of moves forward. He leads his army not just here, but he leads his whole army up through the parts of going from the southern part of Kemet, going up toward the north, in the middle part where some of the Hyksos had their strongholds in the middle part of Kemet. And he takes his army and he goes right at them. The interesting parts about it, he talked about specifically in this writing board, this document, this historical document, that he had a large, well-trained, strong troop of Medjay. The Medjay, as you know, are warriors who are Nubian. They're Nubian. They live to the southern part of ancient Kemet. So you will find them in the southern part, south of like the first cataract and toward the east. These are Nubian people. He had a large part of his troop be the Medjay people. And the Medjay helped to lead the fight and to come in and to fight the Hyksos in this middle part of ancient Kemet. and to scatter their horses, take their horses, to scatter the people, to cause them to retreat. When you think about Nubia and you think about the Medjay, you cannot have the success militarily that the Kemetic people talk about, either in the New Kingdom, as we're talking about here, or in the Middle Kingdom under Mentuhotep II, or even in the Old Kingdom. You cannot have the success that the Kemetic people talk about militarily without Nubian soldiers, without the Medjay and the other soldiers that were a part of their army throughout their history. So this is a part of their army that they have. And when people just have they just never talk about it, right? Or they make you seem some kind of way that maybe the Nubian soldiers were just there for a short period of time. I even read something said that they were probably there and they left and went home. Like that's crazy. When you have soldiers that are helping you in battles, that are going on foot, and they are fighting hand to hand and hand to hand, you give those people rewards. And there's so many documented things and evidence that shows that Kemetic rulers gave rewards to soldiers who fought violently, who fought with valor and bravery. If they were able to kill somebody in battle, or to capture somebody, or to do something brave on the battlefield, they were rewarded. So there's no doubt, if you have people who go on to fight with you, who are bleeding and dying for you on the battlefield, you're going to treat them well. You're not necessarily going to kick them out, and you're going to need them around whenever you need them. So when you think about, Nubian soldiers, you think about the Medjay. And I know a lot of people put down in comments, because we can have our archers, we put the, kind of, heads up to the Medjay. If we heads up from them. So when we put notes about them, we got to give them the respect, because people don't really talk about the ways in which, and it doesn't mean that they were necessarily ethnically different. It just means that they were from a different society. There are all kinds of places that have. We have to give the Medjay and the people who were Nubian soldiers from south of Egypt, south of ancient Kemet, who were in the armies of the Kemetic people fighting the wars for them. And in the 17th dynasty, the Medjay were there. They were there with King Kamose as he went up and going, kind of downward, if you will, going north in the Nile, and basically kicking butt and fighting people. We have to give the Medjay they do. And they were there with Kamose. They were there with other people in the New Kingdom. They were there with Mentuhotep II. They were there in the Old Kingdom. And they were doing their thing. They were kind of kicking butt, if you will. And so you find that Kamose, in this period of time, he is basically extending and just kind of he is extending Kemet's control, and he's starting to develop what would become the 18th dynasty. He pushes the whole Waset and the whole area that's Thebes, the whole Theban consort, if you will, and family and control. He pushes that north, and he pushes that into the Middle Kingdom, and he starts to kick the Hyksos out. This is what Kamose did. He starts to kick the Hyksos out, and then unfortunately he dies. He dies, before he can kind of finish the job. And the job is kind of left to his younger brother. So it's his younger brother that we give like a lot of the success to. And here, almost the first, we give a lot of success to him. And we talk about him because he's considered to be the person who started the 18th dynasty. Because under his watch, once his brother kind of pushed things already north, and we already saw that his grandfather and great-grandfather, his other family members were there kind of taking care of business as well, he begins to push things further. And so he begins to go, not only does he go up here in the north and kind of begin to take over parts of this whole area and Memphis and Avarice, he kicks the Hyksos all the way out of Kemet. He kicks them all the way out. So another document, a third document that I'll mention. So we talk about the writing board. We talk about the papyrus. We'll talk about another document, the whole autobiography of Ahmose, son of Abana. And we've talked about him on the show, and we'll talk more about why he's significant. Ahmose was a young man who became a part of the Navy or the Army, Marines, however you want to call it, of ancient Kemet, right around the time that Ahmose the First came into power. So they have the same name. They're not the same people. It's like Michael or something like that. They have the same name. They're not the same people. So Ahmose the First is the king, and Ahmose, son of Abana, is a soldier in the king's army. And as King Ahmose is taking power, Ahmose the soldier becomes a soldier. He's a young man. He hasn't been married yet. He hasn't taken a wife, if you will. And he starts to kind of fight. And then he eventually gets down, settles down, and becomes married. And then he eventually goes to war. And it's around about that time that he joins the King Ahmose as they travel up to the north. And they basically lay a siege to Avarice. They go there, they lay a siege, and this young soldier talks about how he fights people, how he takes several hands, and the idea of taking hands back in the day from a Kemetic standpoint meant that you killed somebody. So they would, after they killed somebody, they would chop off somebody's hand to prove that they had killed them. So that would be like a way of showing when you went back to, to the king or back to your officer, hey, I killed people, and here's what I did. And he showed several acts of valor. So he fights in several battles as they're seizing Avarice, and the Hyksos are putting up a fight. So this is not an easy fight. The Hyksos, apparently they have horses. They're putting up a fight, right? But the Kemetic people and the Medjay of who were part of the army, apparently the standing army there, the Medjay were there fighting. And the Kemetic people were fighting. And you will find documents that speak to other soldiers talking about in their tombs how they were, even during times of peace in their town, and they were, the fastest soldier in their town, and they were even faster than the Medjay. You have people talk about times of peace and various times of them interacting with Medjay and Nubian people regular. It isn't this thing that people want to say. It's a different perspective, especially when you need them to go to war, especially when you're going to war. So Ahmose tells a story of how they fight avarice, they fight the Hyksos under Ahmose the First. And they drive them all the way out of Kemet. They don't just get them and kill them there. They drive them all the way out, and they go all the way into Palestine. So if you go think about today's Palestine, and even the area where it was one of the areas that's mentioned in the Bible. I think it's Joshua 19, chapter 19, verse 6 is a certain city that's in there. I think it's Shahurin that is mentioned that was a part of the tribe of Simeon. But he puts them in that area. He puts them all the way, kicks them all the way out, and chases them all the way through the Sinai Peninsula into southern Palestine. And apparently he laid siege. So they end up going into this town there, and I guess they take refuge there, and they siege. Apparently they lay a siege. Ahmose the First has a siege where he surrounds this town that's in southern Palestine for 3 years. For years. I mean, when they did these sieges back in the day, they were prepared. They waited you out. If they needed you, they waited you out and let you kind of starve to death and took over. And he eventually overran the town and killed a lot of people, took some people back as prisoners, right? Took some people back as prisoners of war, took them back with him. But he ended up basically, raising that city that the Hyksos had ran to that was in southern Palestine, and even chased them further north. So let's say, you can see why I can say, and a lot of people might say there's a lot of similarities to what the story that's told about, the Jewish people leaving. You can see there's a lot of similarities there, and you can see why people think that maybe this was the connection and not necessarily the stories that people face. You can just see that whole idea. But he chases them right into southern Palestine, and he's there. And so Ahmose the First is now, kicking out the Hyksos, has kicked them clear out of ancient Kemet, kicked them clear across the Sinai Peninsula into southern Palestine, and now he's in control of all of Kemet. And he is officially the founder of the 18th dynasty. And that's where you look at, but when we think about it, that's how people like to present it, that we talk about the 18th dynasty, but there would have been no 18th dynasty. There would have been no 18th dynasty without Kamose, without his brother, without his grandfather, without his great-grandfather. There would have been no 18th dynasty. If the people who were laying the plans, who were fighting the Hyksos, who were, dealing with it, that they talk about in that tale about the hippopotamus and that type of thing, if those people were not there laying the groundwork for what would take place to push their families and push themselves up through the northern part of Kemet, there would have been no 18th dynasty. Not as we know it. No Tutankhamen, no Thutmose III, no Thutmose I, no Amenhotep III, no Hatshepsut, none of that, right? And obviously the 19th dynasty wouldn't have come. You wouldn't have had, King Seti and Ramses II. None of that would have happened if it wasn't for the 17th dynasty. If it wasn't for these people here who were, taking over and doing amazing things, and the men and the women, the wives and the queens and the family and the people and the Medjay and Ahmose the First and Ahmose son of Abana and Kamose and Tau, and all these people who were fighting to make things happen. So I just wanted to bring them today and kind of give them their sauce, their juice, and their love, if you will. I thank you for listening. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and I'll talk to you so very soon. Thank you for joining me. Talk to you very soon.